Hello and welcome to this presentation on Can you teach research in 10 minutes? Embedding information literacy microsessions into modular programs. My name is Rachael and I'm the Information and Skills Development Specialist at Coventry University London. So this project was originally developed at the request of a course director. So they approached me and asked if, instead of doing the traditional 1 hour embedded sessions within that module on research, whether we could drip feed the information and do several 10-minute sessions throughout the module, which would allow the students time to fully develop their understanding of using these databases and put the application and evaluation of the information that they found more fully into their assignments. So we decided on this micro-learning or micro-teaching approach. So this is already commonly used in workplace training. The essentials training or the particular health and safety modules that we complete during our working life are examples of how this micro-teaching or micro-learning works. And it's becoming increasingly popular in higher education as well. So started off in the 1960s in education at Stanford University, but for the workplace, so more for teachers and their development. But there is evidence from all of these places that you can see at the bottom that those regular bite-sized sessions can help individuals to learn more effectively because it gives our brains time to process the information. So once we've decided on this micro-learning or micro-teaching approach, it was a case of sort of putting that together and seeing how and where we could develop that would be most useful for students. So the project was born out of 3 distinct needs. Firstly, the effectiveness of the embedded delivery over the traditional style delivery, the removal of silo mentalities amongst the student community, because traditionally students didn't tend to look at the same sources for information for more than one assessment. So it was getting them to understand that these sources of information could be used across several assessments, and also the validity of those sources as well. So taking away that reliance on Google and showing students a different path. So at the heart of this project was this drive to embed research proficiency within those module programs. So as we can see here, M059 and M060. So it's about getting the students to be used to using the databases, how to search the information and the kind of information that they could find that could be useful for their assessments. So this is where that link to assessment came in and was so important. That collaboration with the course directors allowed them to share their in-depth knowledge of the assessment for these modules, and then in collaboration with the library team, their in-depth knowledge of the databases and search techniques and the kind of information that could be found. So as we know, the student journey is hardly ever linear. So it's hoped that using this drip feed approach, using this micro-teach approach, it could help engagement within the platforms by helping students understand one database at a time and then piecing them all together in a way that suited them for their individual learning journey. So in the first version of this project, we had approximately 150 students in each of the lectures. So because we had so many students, the best way to deliver this information was through live demonstration. But that live demonstration, as well as giving a little bit of a background to that database and the kind of content they could find, would be driven by student response and student engagement. So they would provide information on keywords, they would provide information on the kind of information that they needed to search for. So we put this full programme into action from April 2018. So we started off with 6 databases, so 6 10-minute sessions, plus an additional session at the end, just to recap everything that had gone before and reiterate those search techniques. So initially we focused on Companies House, Euromonitor Passport, Statista, Mintel and IBIS World. So company information, industry information, both globally and UK based. And then in the second version of the project, we added the Office for National Statistics as well. So that was a great platform for students to find out about household spending, what was happening in the economy, and other things to give them a wider picture of what was going on. So what we found at the end of the first version of the project is that the students tended to be quite descriptive about the information that they've used. So they would say, this is the data, but wouldn't really say how it and why it was appropriate for them to use it in their assignments. So we really focused in the next version on the review framework, which, as you can see here, stands for how relevant that information is, the expertise of the person that has developed that information or created that information, the viewpoint of that paper or information, whether it was biased or balanced, who is its intended audience, so who the information was written and pitched at, the evidence that was used within that data, and when that data was published. So we made it explicit to students in the second version that it wasn't about what the data said, it's why that data was so important for them and how applicable it was for their assignment. So because we noticed that they were focusing on the what, we added this in to each of the sessions to get students back on track and focus on the analysis of the information, so why that particular thing was happening. So the impact of the project was in the student pitches at the end of their module programs. We saw that we were getting increased citations from those reliable sources. So previously, students had a reliance on Google for their information. So we were starting to see citations from databases and industry reports and academic journals, as well as those web resources. And students were also displaying those improved critical thinking skills as well, because they were applying the review framework. So they were starting to say how that information was relevant to their hypothetical businesses, as well as stating what the data said. So their improved critical thinking and piecing that information together. They were also identifying those connections between those sources as well. So they had solid conclusions or stronger conclusions, because they were taking those pieces of data from that variety of sources and piecing it together to get the wider picture, to get the big picture of a particular business or industry. So impact not only in terms of how it helped them, but in the library, our evaluation of the project saw an average grade increase of 5% for M059 students and 2.8% for M060 students. So although we can't say that these are significant increases, I think they're nonetheless notable, because it does show that that application and this drip feeding has had a potential effect. So we also saw a 135% increase in one-to-one tutorials for finding that information. So students finally had an understanding of who they could go to if they had any questions about the databases, what advice they could seek, and talking to librarians. So it strengthened the link between the student and the library service by making students more aware of the kind of work that we do and how we can help them. And we also saw a 23.6% increase in our library website hits. So that was their gateway to those databases, to that information. So it went from 54,653 hits in 2018-19 academic year to 67,571 in the following academic year. So that increased appreciation of the library service, that increased knowledge of the library service and how it could help students within their course and for their assessments was having a very, very positive impact. So when COVID, the pandemic hit, so we had to again think about how we could now deliver this information. We couldn't do it anymore to large groups of students in lecture theatres. So we had to create 7 asynchronous database tutorials. So online, students could watch them at their convenience. And each one would have an explanation of the kind of information that students could find within that database, as well as a video walkthrough and a reiteration of the review framework. So students, it made it clear to them that they needed to analyse and apply this information in relation to their assessment and their chosen hypothetical business, as opposed to just focusing on what the data said. So for each of these databases, checking on the engagement from students, it was placed on their virtual learning environment, so through Aula, which is the VLE that we use. And when we tracked this information, we can see that on average, each of those database tutorials has had around 140 page views since the start of the lockdown, so since the first lockdown. So engagement has been steady throughout the pandemic. So hopefully I've been able to demonstrate how the project has developed and moved on in each of the academic years, and how flexible the programme is to apply it to different modules and different students with differing needs. So also that flexibility within creating the asynchronous tutorials as well within the pandemic when we couldn't see students face to face. So this approach it started with M059 and M060, and it has been used in other modules as well, so fashion modules and business modules as well. So it can be tailored to that particular assessment, and students can find different information and different databases that would be more suitable for their assessment needs. So as a project as a whole, because it's flexible and because it's tailored, it is ultimately suitable for all students on all courses. So I've included some references at the end here if you would like to find out more about microlearning and micro-teaching and how it's used in those educational terms. So these are some of the resources that I've used throughout my project. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your questions in the session on the 7th of July.